Xin chào, my name is Sai Thongbor. I am the agriculture counselor here at the New Zealand Embassy in Hanoi. I look after our agriculture and primary sector portfolio, from market access to trade, to research and cooperation between our two countries. Firstly, thank you to the Investment and Trade Promotion Center in Ho Chi Minh City for organizing this event. And thank you for the opportunity for me to be here, albeit virtually. And thank you to the guests who are in the room. I'd also like to say thank you to Joe Nelson, our Trade Commissioner, and to the team down in Ho Chi Minh City. I'd like to start with a brief overview of New Zealand's primary sector trade profile, a little bit on how we operate in the bigger international trade framework, and then a little bit more about the role of myself and my agency, the Ministry of Primary Industries in New Zealand. New Zealand is a small country with a very small population, just over 5 million people. We are also a highly diverse and multicultural society, with many of us living in urban areas in Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. In our small country, we have a very unique environment, we have really strong rules to protect. Biosecurity is very important to us, as unwanted pests and diseases can damage New Zealand's environment, economy, and way of life. New Zealand is a trade-oriented economy. We export a lot, and we also import a lot. Trade in primary goods is very important to our economy. Trade in goods make up around 70% of all New Zealand's goods and services exports. Dairy is our major primary export, but we also export meat, fish, wine, forestry, and horticulture products. Between 70 and 95% of the output that we produce is exported. Without trade, a big chunk of our industries in New Zealand just would simply not exist. Our biggest export destinations are China, Australia, the US, and the EU. Exports have been increasing to Southeast Asia, and we see this as a huge growth potential. Vietnam is one of New Zealand's top 10 export destinations for forestry, seafood, horticulture, and other food and fiber sector products, such as processed foods, cereal products, sugar, and confectionery products. New Zealand increasingly sees itself as part of the Asia-Pacific community. We're located on the Pacific Rim and close to the Asian markets. We are linked to our neighbors by an expansive network of free trade agreements and international partnerships. For example, the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand FTA was signed in 2009, and since 2010, two-way trade has increased by over 60%. We import more from ASEAN than we export. Imports are predominantly non-primary goods, while our exports are almost all primary goods. The benefits of ANZFTA has been built on by the CPTPP as well as RCEP, both of which are expected to make significant contributions to the region's economy. And here are some figures on trade with Vietnam specifically. These are really impressive and fast-growing numbers. In addition, both sides will continue to work closely to facilitate bilateral trade, especially for agriculture, forestry, and aquatic products, and both sides will continue to progress market access for respective priority items, such as Vietnamese limes and pomelos, and New Zealand strawberries and squash. Last year was also the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Vietnam and New Zealand. To mark this critical milestone, we elevated our relationship to a strategic partnership. This was signed in July 2020 by our two prime ministers. As New Zealand and Vietnam enters this new phase of our relationship amid the COVID-19 pandemic, both countries remain committed to a higher level of partnership to enable economic recovery, sustained economic growth, in order to mutually increase our shared prosperity and security. The action plan for the strategic partnership was signed by our two foreign ministers in December 2021. And in addition, the Agriculture Cooperation Agreement was signed in early 2021. This agreement looks specifically at promoting greater trade facilitation and market access for both countries, more cooperation activities in the areas of climate change and environment, as well as rural development and biosecurity and animal health cooperation. In addition to bilateral relationships, New Zealand is also an active member in the multilateral organizations such as the WTO, which is the world's governing body for global trade. When it comes to primary sectors, we focus on a set of rules, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures that come out of the WTO and the other international setting bodies that we call the Three Sisters. So these are the Three Sisters in international standard setting bodies. The Codex is the international food standards body from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to promote international standards for health protection and fair practices in food trade. For example, they set the commodity standards, labeling and hygiene codes, and guidelines for food safety risk assessment. The second one is the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health. They coordinate, support, and promote animal disease control. And the third sister is the ITPC. It is a multilateral treaty overseen by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, that aim to secure a coordinated and effective action to deal with pests of plant and plant products. One of the most important set of rules is the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. These are science-based rules on health protection for plants and animals. The SPS measures mean that all WTO members operate under the same set of rules or harmonization. A risk assessment approach is used to ensure that SPS measures are not used as trade barriers, but that they are justified and based on science. The SPS agreement also means that all governments accept the fact that some trade restrictions may come into play, but this is necessary to ensure that food and safety of animal and plant products are in place and for our health protection. Is based on the assumption that trade should take place unless there are valid health reasons to prevent any of this. Transparency is also key. Governments are required to notify each other and the other countries of any new or changed SPS requirements which affect trade and provide any new information on existing measures. So this is where some of our biosecurity rules come into play, which I will touch on a little bit later. New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industries, or MPI, is the central competent authority responsible for regulating New Zealand's primary production systems, including agriculture, horticulture, food safety, biosecurity, fisheries, and forestry. MPI has a key role in setting and administering standards across New Zealand's primary production sectors, with a specific role in verification and certification, as well as ensuring compliance through a system-wide audit and monitoring and enabling international market access for New Zealand's primary products. MPI also works with central and local government to support increased productivity across the primary sector and increased sustainable use of resources, such as water and soil, and we play a major role in New Zealand's domestic and regional economic development through our work with farmers, fishers, foresters, corporations, banks, Māori, and industry-level bodies. MPI works right across the sector, from primary producers to the retailers and consumers, to protect New Zealand's economy, environment, and human health from pests and diseases, safeguard consumers from the risk of food-related illnesses, protect New Zealand's reputation as a producer of safe food, advise government on policies for natural resource management, animal welfare, environmental issues, market access, productivity enhancements, trade, and bilateral relationships. In addition to our headquarters in Wellington and offices around New Zealand, we also have a global presence with representatives like myself in a number of countries. We value the knowledge of those on the ground who we meet, the relationships that we form from being in country, and the learning and understanding of the market from being here. As I briefly touched on in previous slides, MPI has 5 key branches, and in addition, I'd like to talk a little bit about trade policy, which is where I come in. In trade policy, we provide sector-level strategic thinking and policy advice to government, lead the engagement in multilateral and regional organizations, and our bilateral relationships, such as that with Viet Nam. We negotiate technical market access requirements for primary products and food. We also maintain and enhance access to overseas markets, facilitate trade, deal with certification and verification, and work to influence international arrangements and standards to enable trade. MPI also has branches that look after fisheries, agriculture, and the forestry sectors. Fisheries New Zealand oversees the National Fisheries Management System, is responsible for setting and enforcing catch limits and other marine management initiatives, and a major focus of their work is the sustainability of New Zealand's wild fish stocks, aquaculture, and the wider aquatic environment, now and for our future generations. The Agriculture and Investment Services branch supports increased productivity and sustainable use of resources, animal welfare standards, and regional economic development through working with farmers, fishers, foresters, corporations, banks, Māori, and other industries. Te Ururako, or Forestry New Zealand, focuses on supporting the planting of exotic and indigenous forests, sustainable forestry management, and programs like the Emissions Trading Scheme, forestry grants, and generally working to enhance forestry's role in sustainable land use and climate change mitigation. The other key branches that are particularly relevant to our trade and relationship with Vietnam are food safety and biosecurity. The biosecurity branch works to prevent harmful organisms crossing New Zealand's borders. It manages border and compliance activities, as well as preparing for and responding to any biosecurity incursions that may apply, and runs our surveillance programs. Border staff are at airports and internationally accredited laboratories around New Zealand. Incursion investigators are ready to respond and take samples as a result of routine or passive surveillance, working with our team of 5 million, otherwise known as the New Zealand's population. We are all responsible for reporting anything unusual. At our headquarters, another team responsible for ensuring we are ready with appropriately trained staff and abilities to respond to any potential incursions or events. Due to our isolation as an island nation, we don't have many pests and diseases that you see around the world, and our biosecurity branch is responsible for ensuring we protect our unique environment, flora, and fauna. Biosecurity New Zealand leads MPI's biosecurity management system to protect New Zealand from exotic pests and diseases. I'll stress again the importance of this to New Zealand, and we have a unique environment, and unwanted pests and diseases can do great damage to our ecosystem, economy, and way of life. The last thing I'd like to mention is food safety. Our food safety system ensures food is safe and consumers are protected, sets regulatory requirements, audits, monitors, verifies, and enforces the system. The system also covers pet food and veterinary medication, agricultural compounds and animal feed, protecting consumers of New Zealand food, whether in New Zealand or overseas, providing effective food regulation for food produced or consumed in New Zealand, including imported and exported food products. All food for sale must be imported by a registered food importer. If you want to import food for sale in New Zealand, you must register as a food importer with MPI or use an agent who is registered. Unregistered importers will have their consignments held until they gain their food importer registration. Food importers must also ensure that the food is safe and suitable. All food importers are responsible for meeting the food safety requirements as set out under the New Zealand's Food Act 2014. These include confirming the safety and suitability of food they'll be importing, ensuring safe handling, storing, and transporting of food, keeping good records for traceability, and being prepared to recall food if it is not safe or suitable. Food must also meet labeling and ingredients requirements. Food for sale in New Zealand must comply with the Australia and New Zealand Food Standards Code. This sets rules about what's allowed and not allowed in your food and how it must be labeled when it comes to be sold. And food may need food safety clearance at the border. Some foods present a greater risk to consumers and public health. They're known as foods of high regulatory interest or foods of increased regulatory interest. These foods require food safety clearance and are monitored for specific hazards. The importing food list sets out the safety requirements and what is needed for clearance. The onus is on you as exporters to New Zealand to follow New Zealand's rules. If you need to follow New Zealand's food safety and biosecurity rules, you need to work with your New Zealand importers and your own government agencies who support Vietnamese exporters. You may also want to speak to the Vietnamese embassy in Wellington. So that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you again to the organizers for having me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your session. Thank you. Xin cảm ơn.